This series is made possible by all of my patrons. More about that at the end of the video.
Hello and welcome to the lightest episode of Miro's Hoya Summer Camp. That wasn't even a joke. Why? Listen, I do not have an intro for this one, okay? It's just we're gonna talk about light. There are several things that are the most important when it comes to growing your houseplants, and in this case, Hoyas, but this applies to all the houseplants. And one of those things is the light. It is not the fertilizer, though that is additional thing, but really one of the foundation blocks, one of the building blocks, if you will say, will be the light. I wanted to talk about light because I think it's one of the biggest issues when it comes to growing houseplants. We either don't have enough of it or we don't utilize the light that we have. Also, I have made mistakes when it comes to Hoyas and when it comes to light, and that's fine. We all make mistakes at some point, and I'm gonna share with you everything that I've learned from my Hoya growing mistakes in relation to light, but also in relation to other things. But again, keeping it to light today. To kind of be rough, we can categorize all of the Hoyas into two categories, but I think it's really best to categorize them into three. So we have lower light Hoyas and higher light Hoyas. Now I will put a middle category here, Hoyas that would prefer to be in the middle, so not too much light and not too little light, but those will also be able to take the higher light. Now the low light Hoyas absolutely shan't be liking that high light. I want to say one thing. When I talk about low light Hoyas, I don't mean calathea light. That's not Hoya light. That is calathea light, and that is trash bin light as well. And maybe it is good to define high and low light here. So for me, higher light is southern window, it is western window, directly in the window. It is a grow light that is maybe 50 watts or something around that, and maybe 40 centimeters away from that light. I would classify that as pretty high light. For lower light, I would say northeast or northwest window. North window, I would not put a Hoya in a northern window. Eastern window, I would kind of be maybe low slash medium light. So just to kind of classify that there. In terms of grow lights, I would say that lower light for me is a 10 to 12 watt light around 30 centimeters away from that light. When I talk about low light Hoyas, I want you to think about eastern facing windows, maybe northwest, northeast. Those are the types of exposures that I want you to think about, and Hoyas would like to be in those windows. I have two northwest facing windows that you can see here, and I put in my windows Hoyas that will grow in lower light. Of course, we can always give them a bit more light, but with some of these you want to be careful. Typically Hoyas that I will put in lower light are Hoyas with thinner leaves. So Hoya Lucky, Hoya Multiflora, Hoya Praetori, those are great candidates for lower light. On my own mistakes, I have learned that Hoyas like Hoya Medinellifolia also would prefer lower light. They will grow, of course, in higher light, but they tend to look ugly. So that one can go to the medium light category, but they really tend to not look good. And you will quickly see when you put a Hoya in too much light if it's something that it doesn't prefer, because the new growth is not gonna look great. The leaves are gonna be either chlorotic, they're gonna be burned, or they're gonna be very small. A lot of Hoyas from China also tend to like lower light. I put my serpents in lower light. I have seen that some people do it in higher light, but for me, serpents and Dingchungensis do really well in lower light. Some other Hoyas like Hoya Qinghungensis, Hoya Engleriana, those do fantastic in lower light. I think we all have that lower light section within our home. My advice to you is fill it with Hoyas, and these are some great candidates for that corner. If you're somehow blessed with only highlight windows, like maybe you only have southern exposure or western exposure, what this means is that you would want to pull your plant back 1 to 1.5 meters. I think 2 meters is a bit too much. It could work, it depends again what is your window, but the light will drastically lessen as you go into the interior of your home. And sometimes you can even have southern exposure, but maybe you have some trees in front of the house or in front of your window, or I don't know, maybe you live in New York and you're looking at another building, and then you're not getting so much light. So it's really important to evaluate your situation, and the plant will quickly tell you if the light is not good for it. Hoyas that tend to enjoy higher light are Hoyas with thicker, more succulent leaves. Some of the Hoya finlaysoni, now I'm saying some of the Hoya finlaysoni, this is a group of Hoyas that needs some botanical work. So when I am talking about some like Hoya finlaysoni, what I really mean is Callistophila, I mean Clemenciorum, and some of those that kind of flower very, very similar. So those are the plants that can take more light. But even there are some clones that are really not gonna grow well in higher light, or they will, but they're going to look ugly. In nature, I think when you look at some of the photos, not all of them look great. Sometimes Hoyas will look dehydrated, but maybe in bloom. Sometimes they will be really beat up and damaged. Sometimes they will be burnt. And you know, that is really not the goal for us in our homes. So I do have some Hoyas, some Finlaysoni Hoyas that I grew in too much light, like my Hoya Finlaysoni Nova. It looks okay now because I moved it, so I got some of those nicer leaves, but you can see on the older leaves that it got some more permanent damage. And that's fine, you know, we try, we learn. Also some Hoyas that are kind of reduced in their leaves or maybe don't produce leaves, like Hoya spartioides, are Hoyas that are able to take higher light. For me, some of the small-leaved Hoyas like Hoya sigillatis and anything that is, you know, affinity sigillatis, so that is GPS 7240, VL9, all of those tend to do really well in higher light, and for me, they did not bloom until I exposed them to pretty high light in my grow tent under my grow light. They just wouldn't bloom. Some of the other kind of small-leaved Hoyas, but some of these also have larger leaves, like from the Acanthostema section, Hoya species affinity Bertoniae, Hoya Kentiana / Weyati / that is also not sorted out, would also prefer higher light, and they tend to grow much better in higher light. Not all small-leaved Hoyas will grow well in high light. Hoya microphylla, which is really not a beginner Hoya. Some of the lacunosas can look very beautiful in higher light, but I am really for lacunosa in medium light. I don't like to put them in too much light because I have had issues. The plants wouldn't grow and they would really get stressed out. So you kind of have to find the appropriate light for yourself there. I have tried pretty high light. I'm talking spartioides level light, and they were okay, but they were not thriving. And this is kind of a thing when it comes to Hoyas and high light. Sometimes they will bloom in higher light much sooner than they would bloom in lower light, but the plants won't look so beautiful. And I have experienced this on many Hoyas, that they are just not gonna make beautiful leaves. The leaves are gonna get really small and really ugly. And if you ask me, I would prefer a plant that looks vigorous and healthy than to have a plant that will bloom right away. I tried something like Hoya hippalagia in higher light, and this is the issue with me. When you tell me a plant likes higher light, to me that translates, oh, surface of the sun, okay. I now moved it back to lower light and the new leaves are looking much better. They're looking how they should look, what is normal for this species, kind of longer. So this is Hoya pandurata, a clone from Vietnam, and it is the clone that has beautiful splashy leaves. And from my experience, Hoyas with this bushy type of growth would really prefer lower amounts of light. I had Hoya pandurata, the regular green version, in my grow tent, and what I would say is medium to kind of highlight, going into highlight, and that one burned in the tent. I would say it was about 40-50 centimeters, maybe off to the side in the corner, but it was 300 light dimmed to about 50 watts. I think that was approximately the situation there, and she did not care for that. Now she's growing on the bottom of my Hoya grow wall. The light is again 300 watts. I would say she's about 50 centimeters away from that light, but that light is now dimmed all the way down. But for example, if we look at my grow wall, I would say that the top row of this Hoya wall is getting what I would say is medium to high, not even really high light, because the light is dimmed all the way, and I don't see that some of the plants like Hoya Hirschkeliana are sun stressing, so that is really not the highest. And then you can see in the second row I have some Hoyas that are like Hoya Bella, I have Hoya elliptica, and those are Hoyas that I would put in medium amounts of light. You can put Hoya Bella in higher amount of light, but I wouldn't do it. for me, she doesn't look that great. And then lower, we can see Hoya polynera, Hoya burmanica, Hoya pandurata. Hoya kanyakumariana is, I would say, in something that I would classify as lower light, maybe similar to what you would have in an eastern or northeast northwest facing window. This one is on top of the cabinet, and again, I would really classify that as low light, and I don't really mind putting her there because sometimes they can grow also well in those conditions. And you can just see when this plant was in less light how big the leaves were. So these were grown in lesser light, and you can see how small these are as she was getting closer to the light. This is something that can be noticed with a lot of Hoya species. If you put them in more light, the leaves are getting smaller. If you put them in less light, the leaves are going to get bigger. And to be honest with you, I prefer the bigger leaves. What this means is that potentially your Hoya is going to grow a little bit slower, maybe with longer internodal spaces, and that she will not bloom as frequently. And with some of the plants, again, I am really 100% okay with making that sacrifice. You have to kind of see for yourself. I tend to grow my carnosas, my Hoya fungi, species stemmed out, which is again most likely fungi, I believe. I tend to grow those in what I would say low light. Also the bushy types, because they tend to take up a lot of space. I don't mind if they slow down a little bit, though some of them have not been slowing down at all. One of the very popular Hoyas is Hoya meredithii, and I had that one in higher light and I did not like it. The leaves get very bleached, very light green, and they get some sun stressing, but it looks burnt to me. I don't like it. If you do, great. I didn't prefer it. I put it in lower light, and then she starts to produce really large, healthy looking leaves. She's a beautiful Hoya if you get the light right for her. So how to pick the right amount of light for your Hoya? Well, you can go on the internet, you can try to find care tips, you can go on ResearchGate, maybe find where this Hoya grows in nature. Or what I like to do is I just like to kind of inspect my plant, and sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong, and that's okay. You try it out and you see. And what I typically do is if it has small succulent leaves, if it has kind of needle-like leaves, like maybe Hoya acicularis, I would put that in higher light. For example, the exception here is Hoya linearis. I don't think that one prefers high light. I had a plant, a big plant, and it grew really well in lower light, and unfortunately then I forgot it outside and the winter came. Worst ways to die. If it's a Hoya with very thick, very succulent leaves like Finlaysoni, Clemenciorum, those Hoyas also can take more light. Something like Hoya undulata can take more light, but not all of those that look like that can take more light. For example, Hoya caudata, it has very thick leaves, but I do find that Hoya caudata grows a little bit better in medium light. She tends to look prettier. You can put her in higher light, but I just did not like the way that those sun stress. To me, they don't sun stress pretty. Hoyas that kind of have the gentle look, they tend to fall into the medium or lower light category. So most of the thin-leaved Hoyas, I actually don't know of a thin-leaved Hoya that would prefer high light. Maybe there are some. If you know some, let me know. But I grow Amrita in lower light. I grow Mandanellifolia in lower light. Pretty important. Loki, Multiflora, Praetori, all of those are in lower light. Hoya lobby, in my opinion, tends to look super ugly in higher light. Would not grow it in higher light whatsoever. Anything really with a dainty look, I tend to put in lower light at first, then I see how they do there, and if I'm not happy with the growth, then I try slightly higher light. In general, when you get a new cutting, in my opinion, it is best to start it off in lower light, and then you can kind of see, because for a cutting to root, you actually don't really need light. I do put them under like a very weak 10-watt lamp in the beginning, but I put them in a propagation box and I leave them there for usually 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes a bit longer, and then I move them to lower light. Sometimes that means in the same spot where the propagation box was, so under like a 10 or 12 watt light in my Rodsta cabinet, that is the bottom level. Sometimes that means on a shelf in my tent that is off to the side, and kind of lower on the shelf, maybe on the floor of the tent, also on the walls of the tent. So those are the spaces where I would put a new Hoya. And then you can see in usually a month or so how the plant is growing, if it's growing at all, if it's not growing, and then you can decide where to move it. But I think in the beginning, when the cuttings are establishing, it is better not to expose them to higher light, because that can be pretty stressful for the plant, or so is at least my opinion. When it comes to artificial light, LED artificial lights are really good. You can choose to buy an actual grow light, or you can choose to buy light in the hardware store, which is the cheapest. When I was starting out, I was buying the cheapest hardware store lights, and they did really well for me. Some of the grow lights will be a bit more efficient when it comes to the electricity consumption and how much space they can light up. For example, my light in my grow tent, that can light up the entire grow tent, the top of the grow tent, using 50 or 60 watts. And then I have two 36-watt tubes that are just enough for my small tent, but if I was to put them in the same size grow tent, they would not do a good job. So they are a bit more efficient. Of course, with that comes the price. In my opinion, they're more durable. They don't heat up as much. Important thing when it comes to artificial lighting, do not have it on 24/7, for heaven's sakes. This is a pretty common mistake that people do. I mean, just imagine if you had the light on 24/7. Would you like it? Would you grow better? Would you feel better? Absolutely not. We do need to turn off the lights. I typically keep them on from anywhere between 12 or 16 hours. I would not go for more than 16 hours. I think 12 to 14 would be pretty good. Sometimes you can go for 16 hours if you want to try out to manipulate the photo period, so the length of the day and night. So maybe if you want to trigger something to bloom, maybe you can expose it to 16 hours of light for a month, and then cut it to 12. And a good thing to use here are the timers, so you don't have to worry about these things yourself. Sometimes some Hoya species can surprise us as well. So something like Hoya thompsoni, Hoya yuananensis, Hoya lee, those for me tend to prefer lower light. And I can tell you that my Hoya yuananensis was not having it in higher light. She was not growing. I got like 3 leaves at most. And then I put her in the corner of the tent away from the light, and she started to grow really, really well. So this is the issue. When you put something that really doesn't want highlight in highlight, all growth stops. And you can spray it with sulfur, with whatever you want. It's not the mites. It is the light. From my experience, really a lot of the Chinese species tend to prefer lower to medium light, but not high light. I could be though wrong, so just keep that in mind, but that has just been my experience. So let's sum it up in the end. When you get a new Hoya, you are not going to put it 5 meters away from the window. I don't care if it's southern wind, I don't care. Do not put it 5 meters away. If you have southern windows, I will allow 2 meters. And that's that. And that also depends on the species. If you get a thin-leaved Hoya, she's probably going to prefer lower light. If you have a very succulent Hoya with very thick leaves, she's probably going to prefer higher light. Hoyas with very small leaves, like Sigillatis, will prefer higher light, and Lacunosas can get away with higher light, but also medium light. I hope that you enjoyed the video and that it helped you kind of figure out where to put your Hoya. And if you had some mistakes in terms of light, believe me, I've had them. I've put so many Hoyas in too much light because I'm a light enthusiast. But there are a lot of species that really, really thrive in higher light. So it's tricky. We're all still learning. I'm still learning, especially when it comes to grow lights. Those can be pretty tricky for beginners, like the actual grow lights. That is why I kind of suggest you to go with hardware store lights, at least in the beginning, and then you can maybe try the grow lights. Maybe it's just me, maybe it's not such a steep learning curve. For me, it hasn't been smooth sailing. I kind of had to figure it out. I remember first time when I got, oh my gosh, it was like I put Hoyas under 100 watts, 100% light. Stuff was burning. So yeah, there is no shame. We are all here to learn and to try out things. And that's why I make these videos, to share all the stupid things that I do. Wow. Subscribe. What a pitch. But really, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below, let me know if you have any issues with Hoyas in terms of light, and if you're struggling with placement of your plant. If I don't reply, well, maybe someone else will. and it will be kind of good to see maybe if you learned something about your specific Hoya, what light situation she prefers, like how I learned for my Midnifolia or Meredithy, what kind of light they prefer. You know, leave all of that down in the comments below, so someone who comes in 20 years and sees me at the peak of my youth will know where to put their Hoyas. Have a great week, and I will see you pretty soon in the next video. Bye!
I would like to thank all of my patrons who make content like this possible. A massive shout out to my $5 patrons. My 3 anonymous patrons, Alex von Siebenthal, Anne Margaret Moine, Angela Bernard, Angela Parrish, and C. Ashley Hoyas, Beth Gibson, Betsy, Catherine Molina, Danube Daniels, Daria Kuminska, Deanne Sikorsky, Farah, Gina Geise, Go Green Tropical, Heather Uppinkamp, Hoji Scott, Houseplant Heather, Hoya Heather, Yana Griffin, Jessica Chia, Jovan Denot, Kara, Casey Gross, Callie Cook, Kelso, Kiwi Mochi, Kristen Sherwood, Leplan De Steph, Mandy Milliken, Marcel Har, Mars B, Martina, Leaf Per Day, Marty Miller, Mary Rose, Melissa Walker, Michael Curley, Nicole Ferranti, Moa Edmond, Neil Yang, Niha Basso, Nicole Moreau, Nicole and Caleb of Schlieve Tropicals, Anita Macy, PJ, Plan Druid, Rachel Peterson, Robin L. Jennings, Robin Roos, Salom Adal, Sherry Kumar, Stephanie H2O, Sybil Williams, Tanya, Tessa Martins, Tia B, TJWO, Trista Bailey, Wendy Foreman, Wendy Rossman, Xenia Green, Youth of the Walamut, Zardarama, and Zlokov Niponi. A big thank you to my $3 patrons, Angelina Farnan, Anna K, Brenda Little, Brianna Phillips, Kilon, Claudia L, Erin Keenan, Lindsay, Lisa Helling, Morgan Kennedy, Nella, Plantolenia Ringlov, and Tang Watana Surya Cool. And thank you to my $1 patrons, Kari, Christina Greengrass, Constance, Couture Helvetica, EDW, Emilia Bronson, Joanna Pearson, Jolie Sullivan, Kayla Vavra, Lauren M, Lauren Ann Subramaniam, Luzman Fernandez, Neely Spicer, and Olivia Chin Mueller.